The truth about why saying yes is killing your energy. We live in a world where saying yes is rewarded, praised, even worshipped. From childhood, we're taught to be agreeable, cooperative, helpful. We're told that saying yes means we're open to life, that we're kind, generous, ambitious. And in many ways, that's true. Opportunity often lives on the other side of yes. But what no one tells you is that beyond a certain point, saying yes becomes a slow form of self-betrayal. It drains your vitality, scatters your attention, and erodes your sense of self. And the most tragic part, most of us don't even realize it's happening. We keep saying yes to people, to obligations, to roles we've outgrown, not because we want to, but because we're afraid of what saying no might mean. Let's zoom way out. Imagine your energy as a currency. Each day, you wake up with a limited amount. But every yes is a transaction, and if you're not careful, you'll spend your energy on things that don't matter, leaving nothing for what actually does. But the real question isn't just what you're saying yes to. It's why you're saying it. Because behind most yeses is a hidden fear. Fear of disappointing others, fear of being judged, fear of being left out, fear of seeming selfish. And that fear is subtle. It disguises itself as responsibility, as compassion, even as ambition. But it's not clarity, it's compulsion. And compulsion always costs you something.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many times have you said yes when your body screamed no? How often have you overridden your own intuition just to be polite, to be liked, to maintain the peace? And what did that cost you, not just in time, but in energy, in authenticity, in alignment? This is where philosophy meets real life. The ancient Stoics believed in the power of living in accordance with nature, not nature as trees and rivers, but your nature, your inner wisdom, your core values. And every time you say yes to something that violates that nature, you fragment yourself. You chip away at your own integrity. Seneca said, "If you do not know to which port you are sailing, no wind is favorable." In other words, if you don't have a clear internal compass, you'll be carried by the winds of other people's expectations. You won't live your life, you'll live theirs. But here's the deeper issue. Most of us don't know what we truly value because we're too busy reacting. We're addicted to being needed, to feeling useful, to being seen as reliable. We confuse overcommitment with worth. And so we say yes to everything until we're exhausted, resentful, and empty. And then we wonder why we feel so disconnected from ourselves, why we can't find time for what really matters, why we're always tired. The truth: we've been giving away our life force in exchange for approval. And think about this, when you say yes to something, you're also saying no to something else, often to yourself. You're saying no to rest, to reflection, to your own projects, your own healing, your own growth. That trade-off might seem small in the moment, but over time it becomes existential. You wake up one day and realize you've lived a life of service to everyone except the person inside you who's been quietly whispering, "What about me?" Now, I'm not saying we should become selfish or isolated. Quite the opposite. Boundaries are not walls. They're filters. They protect what's sacred. And if everything is allowed in, if every request gets a yes, you lose the ability to discern what's truly worth your energy. You become a servant to the urgent, not the important. And that, right there, is how dreams die. Not in some dramatic moment, but in 1,000 unexamined yeses. So let's flip this around. What if saying no wasn't rejection, but revelation? What if every no was a declaration of your values, a commitment to your path, a signal to the universe that says, I know what I stand for? What if no was sacred? But here's the catch: it takes courage. It takes self-trust. It takes being okay with being misunderstood, with disappointing people, with being seen as difficult. Because the truth is, people will only respect your boundaries as much as you respect them yourself. And if you keep betraying your own limits, the world will keep asking for more. Not because it's cruel, but because you've never shown it otherwise. So ask yourself, where in your life are you saying yes out of guilt instead of alignment? What would you reclaim if you stopped giving your energy to things that don't nourish you? The hidden cost of pleasing everyone, why your soul is starving if Part 1 exposed the lie that saying yes is always noble. In Part 2 dives even deeper into the hidden emotional economy of people-pleasing. Because let's be honest, most of us don't say yes because we want to. But we say yes because we're terrified of what might happen if we don't. We fear rejection. We fear disconnection. We fear being seen as selfish, ungrateful, difficult. And so we keep giving our time, our attention, our emotional labor. We become everything to everyone except ourselves. And the price? Our soul begins to starve, quietly, slowly, but undeniably. Pleasing everyone is not a virtue. It's a survival strategy, one we learned early, often in childhood, when love felt conditional. But when being good, helpful, compliant meant safety. We internalized the belief that our worth was tied to how useful we were to others. And so we adapted. We became hyper-aware of other people's needs and completely disconnected from our own. We became performers, caretakers, peacekeepers. But here's the tragedy. In trying to be liked by everyone, we lost touch with who we actually are. You see, your soul doesn't speak in obligations. It speaks in desires, in yearnings, in quiet knowing. And every time you override that voice to please someone else, you send yourself a message, you don't matter. And over time you believe it. You stop asking what you want. You stop listening to your body's signals. You stop dreaming. Because what's the point? You're always on call for someone else's life. Let me ask you something penetrating. When was the last time you said yes and immediately regretted it, but went through with it anyway? Not because it aligned with your values, but because you didn't know how to say no without guilt swallowing you whole. That guilt, by the way, is not your enemy. It's your teacher. Guilt often shows up not because you've done something wrong, but because you're doing something different. Something that breaks the pattern of overgiving. Something that reclaims your worth. And this isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about becoming sovereign. There's a massive difference between generosity that flows from abundance and giving that leaks from emptiness. When you give from depletion, your gift comes with strings: resentment, expectation, fatigue. But when you give from a place of fullness, your yes is clean. It's sacred. It doesn't cost your soul. Here's a truth most people will never say out loud. Not everyone deserves your energy. Some people are addicted to your compliance. They benefit from your inability to say no. They've built their comfort on your silence. And the moment you start choosing yourself, they'll call you selfish. But you're not selfish. You're just done being a sacrificial lamb for other people's chaos. You've realized that peace isn't found in pleasing others, it's found in honoring yourself. And think about this. If you're always available, always agreeable, always accommodating, then your presence stops being a gift. It becomes an expectation. You teach people how to treat you by how you treat yourself. So if you keep showing up for everyone else while abandoning yourself, don't be surprised when no one notices you're drowning. This is the hidden cost. Your soul shrinks in proportion to the number of yeses you offer out of fear. You become a ghost in your own life, visible to everyone but yourself. And that's the real tragedy, not that others take from you, but that you never learned how to stop giving what was never asked with love. So what's the alternative? Radical honesty, radical boundaries, radical self-respect. You start by asking yourself, what would I do if I wasn't afraid of being disliked? And then you do that. Not recklessly, not violently, but clearly, firmly, lovingly. That's how you start feeding the soul that's been starving under the weight of your people-pleasing. And here's the final twist. When you stop trying to please everyone, you attract the people who don't need you to. You stop performing and you start connecting. Not from a place of desperation, but from truth. The philosophy of no, how saying less creates a life that means more. There is a quiet kind of power in the word no. Not the explosive, defiant no that comes from rebellion or anger, but the still, unwavering no that rises from clarity. The no that doesn't need justification. The no that doesn't shake or apologize. The no that says, I know who I am and I know what I stand for. That no is rare, it's sacred, and it's the foundation of a meaningful life. Because here's the paradox, the more you say no, the more space you create for what truly matters. And yet, most people live in the opposite direction, filling their lives with yeses out of fear, until there's no room left for their own soul to breathe. We've been conditioned to believe that saying yes is about abundance and openness, while saying no is about limitation and lack. But that's a shallow view. In truth, saying no is one of the most abundant things we can do. It is the act of protecting our energy, our time, our purpose. It is the conscious refusal to dilute ourselves. Think about it. Every time you say no to a distraction, you say yes to your focus. Every time you say no to a toxic relationship, you say yes to your peace. Every time you say no to a version of yourself that was built purely to please, you say yes to the version that's real. But let's be real, saying no is hard. Not because it's unnatural, but because it threatens the identities we've built. We've wrapped our self-worth around our usefulness, our availability, our compliance. And so every no feels like a threat to the ego. Will they still like me? Will they still need me? Will I still matter? These are not shallow questions. They cut deep into our philosophical wiring. We are social creatures. We are wired for connection. But connection built on self-abandonment is not connection, it's dependency. And it comes at the cost of our dignity. This is where philosophy becomes essential. Because saying no isn't just a behavioral skill, it's an existential stance. It's a declaration of what you believe life is for. If life is a gift, and not just a sequence of obligations, then every yes should be sacred. Every yes should be deliberate. Every yes should align with who you are becoming. Otherwise, you're not living, you're reacting. You're not choosing, you're surviving. The ancient philosophers knew this. The Stoics, the Buddhists, even the existentialists, they all, in their own way, pointed to the same truth. Freedom is not found in doing more, but in needing less, in choosing less, in focusing on what is essential. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you seek tranquility, do less." But he wasn't talking about laziness. He was pointing to the profound art of discernment, of knowing what to say yes to, because you've learned how to say no to everything else. And this is where your life starts to change. When you begin to say no, not just externally, but internally. No to the voice that says you're only lovable when you're useful. No to the patterns that keep you exhausted. No to the internalized pressure to always be on, always be available, always be performing. You strip away the noise. You return to yourself. And in that quiet you find something shocking. Your truth has been waiting for you. Your deepest desires, your creative impulses, your original questions, they were never gone. Just buried under a mountain of yeses you never meant to give. Let me ask you this: what could you create, who could you become, if you weren't afraid to disappoint anyone? It's a terrifying question, but it's also liberating. Because behind every no you're afraid to say is a life you're afraid to live. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the life you're meant to live demands a level of courage that most people never access. Not the courage to fight others, but the courage to stop fighting yourself. So what does this look like practically? It means slowing down enough to ask, is this mine? Every time a request comes in. It means checking in with your body, not your calendar, before you commit. It means allowing silence instead of rushing to fill it with agreement. And most of all, it means recognizing that your energy is not infinite. You are not a machine. You are a soul in a body, with limits and rhythms and needs. And honoring those limits is not weakness. It's wisdom. Saying no is not closing off life. It's choosing what kind of life you want to live. It's the difference between a life that's full and a life that's fulfilling. You can have a calendar packed with obligations and still feel empty. Or you can have a life filled with intentional no's and finally feel free. The final liberation, how reclaiming your energy rewrites your identity. When you begin reclaiming your energy, something radical happens, not just in your habits or your daily routine, but in your identity. That you start to see that you were never truly overwhelmed by life itself. You were overwhelmed by the roles you felt obligated to play. The moment you stop pouring yourself into everything that asks for your attention, you begin to realize how much of your life was scripted by fear rather than created by intention. And that realization changes everything. Because energy is not just fuel, energy is direction. It's identity. It's who you are becoming with every yes and no you speak into the world. Think about this. Every time you say yes to something, you're not just offering your time. You're offering yourself. You're shaping your identity. And most people live fragmented lives because their yeses are disconnected from their truth. They say yes out of habit, out of expectation, out of guilt. And over time, their life becomes a museum of other people's priorities. But when you begin to say no with clarity, you begin to rebuild your life from the inside out. You stop being the person the world wants you to be, and you start becoming the person you were meant to be. This shift is not just philosophical, it's deeply practical. You begin to notice who drains you and who energizes you. What feels aligned versus what feels performative. You start carving out space to think, to create, to rest, to grieve, to dream again. And in that sacred space, your deepest self begins to re-emerge. Not the self you curated for approval, but the raw, honest self who knows what matters. The self who doesn't need to be everything to everyone. The self who is finally free to be enough as they are. But here's the final truth. Reclaiming your energy is not just about protecting your peace. It's about reclaiming your power, because the world is not changed by people who are constantly drained. The world is changed by people who are rooted, people who know what they stand for, and more importantly, what they don't. People who are willing to disappoint others in order to stay true to themselves. So that kind of person is rare, but that kind of person is you. Once you stop leaking your energy into every request, every expectation, every unspoken fear. So I'll leave you with a final, piercing question. If you stopped giving your energy to everything that isn't aligned with your soul, what kind of life would finally have the space to grow? That's not a rhetorical question. That's an invitation to stop apologizing, to start listening, to honor the sacredness of your own energy, your own path, your own truth. Because in the end, it's not just about saying no. It's about finally saying yes to yourself.